Let's talk a little bit about I-cord and then about doing a 2-color I-cord with fewer ends to mess around with, or at least to have to deal with at the end. So I-cord is simply a process where we knit across, and then rather than turning the work, we push it back to the other side, which is why it's important to do this either with circular needles or double-pointed needles. And then we start knitting again on this side. Now this is going to draw the yarn from this side all the way to this side, which will eventually, after a few rows, make it into a tube. And then you just knit across. And then, as I mentioned, all you have to do is slide it from here to be ready to work again. Now, in the gnome patterns, I like to knit a little bit in the hand color and then switch to the body color as though it was a sleeve. And I am a big believer in having as few ends to deal with at the end as possible. So what I've discovered you can do is, for 2-color I-cord, just snip the yarn a little ways up, a couple inches, about 2 inches, which would be about 6 centimeters, something like that. Then just join the new yarn at the right side. So just knit across like nothing weird is happening. Make sure that you leave a yarn tail about the same length and just knit across. We'll deal with that end in a moment and secure it down. So this first stitch is going to be loose and floppy. That's okay. We knit all the way across. And then we place it down. And we've got the new yarn coming from one side, the older yarn coming from the other side. And all I want you to do is tie a regular knot, like you are tying up your shoes, fairly tight to bring those two sides together like an I-cord tube. And then do the same thing a second time. 2 knots, securing those ends. And then what I like to do is I actually like to flip these 2 tails forward. All right. Flip these 2 tails forward, and I push it to the other side, and I go to work I-cord as usual. So I've got my yarn here, I'm gonna knit, and I knit fairly snugly to try to make that tube happen on that first stitch, and then, oops, put that back and reknit that stitch, knit across, and as usual, I'm gonna have to slide it from one side to the other. And again, I'm going to bring those ends that I tied together in a knot, and I'm going to drape them forward so that the working yarn is always coming behind them, because what's going to happen is you're going to knit the I-cord tube all the way around them. And then right near the end, you just snip off those ends and they just lay within the I-cord tube itself, and you don't have to worry about how to bury them because you've literally buried them by knitting around. So just bring them forward, working yarn comes behind them, and it makes that tube knit right around the stitches. Now let's say we had done as many rows as we needed to get the I-cord as long as we needed it to be. Then we're going to cut the yarn, leaving a much longer tail this time because we're actually going to use this tail to sew it together onto the body. So I'm going to cut that. I thread it through a yarn needle, and then just like I would knit this from this side to that side. So we're going to slide that end through those stitches. Actually, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these ends. I'm going to pull them a little tight, just putting a little tension there, and I'm going to cut nice and close so that then when the tension releases, they pop back down in. And then I'm going to take that yarn needle, and I'm just going to slide it through in the same direction I would have knit them for the I-cord. And then I draw that through, and that is how the tip of the arm is formed there. We will sew that onto the gnome body. And then to deal with this last end from the cast on, I simply thread it back on a yarn needle, and then I jam it straight up through the I-cord, pulling it nice and tight. And again, I put some tension on it so that when I snip it, it disappears into that tube, and we have one end, which we are going to use to sew the arm onto the gnome, nice and tidy and simple. And it's not at all painful when we all get to the end and it's like, oh, how many ends are there to deal with? Just the one I'm using to sew it on. Hope this tip helps you. Happy knitting.